Great. It's lovely to be here this morning. So I'm glad to see some faces I know, faces I don't know so well. So yes, thank you for having me here on Saturday morning. This is the fourth precept has been something that I think has been a bit of something that has been I've been working on for a few years in a sense. So as much as this is kind of talking about what truth means to me, it is really about what truth means to me. So, but I'm going to start a little bit just with the beginning on ethics, actually, which was borrowing a little bit from Vasantra, but also connected to a trip that I made to Wellington recently, and I had this day off where I went and had this exploration of the Tapapa Museum, which was absolutely fantastic. And in there was this whole exhibition that was based on the Pacific Wayfinders, and I remember seeing this map of the Pacific Ocean, and it had these pathways, like these actual pathways that run across the ocean, that were picked up and used by the Pacific Islanders that were travelling from one place to another. And I think it kind of blew me away slightly that there were physical pathways in an ocean. It kind of broke my preconceived idea of what a pathway was, and then of course then that asked the question, well, how does one navigate from one island to another when the Pacific Ocean is bigger than all of the land mass in the world put together, and islands are just these tiny specks from one spot to another. So just a kind of fraction of a degree, of course, and you could just end up in the middle of nowhere. Well, we kind of are in the middle of nowhere in a sense. So so kind of learning about the Pacific Islanders and how they would navigate the ocean by the stars and the currents. They would have a kind of a very deep intuitive understanding of the different currents at different times of year, the different migrations of the different animals, the winds, the stars at different times of years, where the sun rose on different times of the year. Cloud formations would appear differently over islands and land masses, which you could see from a distance. So there's all of this incredible intuitive understanding in order to kind of have this skill. So they had to be alive to everything that was happening in any moment. They had to kind of be taking on all of this information to make decisions and to as a kind of a way to traverse the ocean. So I kind of see, I guess my own understanding of ethical practice really does feel this way in a sense. Like it isn't, we have these precepts which can be taken in this kind of very black and white kind of way if we don't really kind of tease out the nuances of them. There's this sense of, in any moment we are working with crosswinds and conflicting currents and different information, and how do we kind of take that on board to kind of move through and to head more in the direction that we want to. And for me, something, even just an idea of what that destination is, or why I might want to do that. For me, there's something about beauty, and beauty not just in its aesthetic sense, but beauty as in just in the sense of a quality, to have a beautiful mind, to see beautiful action in the world. And that beautiful mind, I kind of like to think of as having like a luminous clarity of knowing, and a wise and compassionate mind. and that's a path that leads to the freedom of the Buddha. So, yeah, so I guess with that in mind, you know, precepts are training principles on this journey. They're not a conventional ethics of right and wrong, and they're not the commandments of good and bad. They're training principles and skillful means to help us get to know the tides, so the inner tides and the outer tides, and how do those things come together, and how do they help us make informed decisions and get a deeper understanding of ourselves. And they're an invitation to discovery, actually, I think. And I know that as other people here that have kind of given talks in the last few weeks on other ethical principles, and this morning I'm kind of very much here to talk about exploring the fourth principle, the fourth precept. So I think I'm picking up, as has been explained previous weeks, that we have this negative and positive formulations. The negative formulation being Musavada, Veramani, Sekabdam, Samadhyami, which is I undertake the training principle of abstaining from false speech. And the positive formulation being with truthful communication, I purify my speech. So we can kind of see these two, when these two kind of come together, there is a sense of that which will help me on my path, and that's which will take me off course, in a sense. And I've just found this very wonderful quote by Bhante Sangharajita that says, "The spiritual life is a matter of seeking the truth and learning to live by it, whatever the cost." So that's really kind of, for me, what opens up this sense of my own exploration into what is that? What does that look like? So I'm going to talk first of all like on a societal level about truth, and then I'm going to kind of go into a bit more of a personal experience of that. So this term post-truth era, which kind of is being used a lot, terms like fake news, and I think with particularly the period that we've just come out of, with particular leaders of the Western world at the moment that have just passed, really, Boris, Trump, ScoMo, and just kind of watching it from as much of an objective perspective as is kind of possible, you kind of see this kind of constant control, constant battle to control the narrative. It's like, no matter what's out there, I'm going to give you a different version. And what that does is it kind of creates this quagmire of what's real and what isn't real. Watching them discrediting anyone who speaks against them in any way. It's kind of this form of defense, and almost like this constant role of being the victim to something and avoiding responsibility for anything. But to say I don't, we talk about this as being a modern thing. I think, just even going back to Murdoch and Packer, monopolising the press to control conversation and to move their agenda through in the political atmosphere. But even if we go back before that, we can see, I think even another thing that's kind of very much coming through at the moment is, I remember hearing this term that history is written by the victors. And particularly at the moment, just really getting that sense of First Nations people are only now really being able to tell the truth of their history. And that's not only for them, there's many cultures in the world that are, I think, in that position at the moment, but particularly alive here. So it kind of becomes this versions of the truth where everything is open to interpretation and subject to personal agendas, and rather than informed opinion, distilled from multiple perspectives, truth invites and makes possible the expression of different viewpoints. So instead of, if you have this something that's informed on fact, informed on something that has a deeper sense of truth, it's much more easy to find your own way and to have your own viewpoint in that, and then have a discussion based on that. Because I think when truth is not valued, there's no basis for civilization and society. There's no trust, there's no rule of law, no justice, no woven fabric of understanding, so no community. Yeah, so as I said, it's kind of you see this kind of quagmire of chaos and vagueness and uncertainty and fear, which works for certain people and doesn't work for others. And it undermines and disempowers. So just kind of getting a sense of that, we can be more discerning about the information that we take in. We can liberate facts from agendas within our own understanding of things. We can ask questions. We can value truth. We can even stand for truth in a sense. We can if we can do that within our own practice. Do you know what I mean? Like, misinformation can only live in a society that doesn't question it, in a sense. Because truth is how we relate. If we knowingly lie, we are harbouring truth for ourselves and distorting other people's understandings. And the nuances of this, there are nuances to this, which are things like it doesn't have to be a straight out lie, inflation, exaggeration, omission, pretending to know something or to not know something. All of these are just kind of subtleties and nuances to that. Even how we engage in social media, projecting, distorting a sense of reality, or just do kind of curation of what we show and what we don't show, or not show, if that's your choice, I guess. And I guess I often kind of catch myself feeling either seduced or incensed by one version of a narrative, and narratives can hold a lot of power. So, they're kind of narratives are both how we gather meaning and understanding, but they can also oversimplify things and take something that's kind of quite multi-dimensional and complex and almost like flatten it into something two-dimensional and digestible, and something that becomes fixed then, like this fixed story, because it's almost like, well, that's complete, we can kind of understand that now. Where actually, even understanding and seeing my own narrative and how that changes. I know if I hold on to a narrative within my own understanding of myself, if I don't let it change, I become stuck. So I can kind of see how that then echoes outwards as well as inwards. So that then really kind of takes us onto a more personal level, doesn't it? We can only take responsibility for our own ethical development and maturity. And as part of that interconnected and relational world, we can stand for truth. But truth starts with ourselves and how we are truthful to ourselves. It's not just an outward expression. So, we tell ourselves better stories or more palatable versions of stories so that we can feel a bit more comfortable with ourselves, and maybe we don't have to go into any deeper self-reflection or avoid any sense of shame or any other difficult feelings. We can even catastrophize or hold on to these kind of stories for a lifetime. Think of those stories that are almost more subliminal, like deep currents that run under the ocean. Those those stories that we have that aren't even cognitive, they're almost like the lens that we look through the world with, like stories like the victim, stories like the outsider, stories like the perfectionist, or what was my other one? The rescuer, there's another one. And think about then when one person's perfectionist meets another person's victim, these underlying currents that are kind of meeting and colliding, and we kind of see the ripples on the surface, but actually there's something else going on. Or someone, another person's rescuer meets another person's outsider, and how, what do those dynamics create? So truth is not always evident. We have to dig for it. And sometimes it's really simple, and sometimes we just can't see it. And in this, I guess, so much communication can become pseudo-communication, or communication between projections. Even going as far to say that maybe it's even got a flavour of avoidance, kind of when we fill the world with words, we're trying to have some kind of connection, but actually we're kind of avoiding connection at the same time. And my own version of this, my own working ground, I guess a few years ago, I discovered, I had a habit of dissociation. I didn't realise this was news to me. It was pointed out. And that dissociation, which is like a fourth option to the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, I think it's called, which I don't feel very comfortable with, but there we go. So it's like when anything felt particularly threatening, I would just go offline. I'd kind of just almost like feel my body go heavy and my eyes drop, and it was almost just like I felt myself crash. So in that, I suddenly felt this urgency to be alive to myself and everything I felt, as much as it was possible, really. I think there are strong generational patterns in there, and it's almost quite easy to then start pointing fingers, when we kind of take that on. But actually, this is my body and my experience and my responsibility. And if I don't, and it's mine to transform. And even then, to point fingers and blame is just another form of avoidance, actually. It's like, how can we actually get really in touch with ourselves and be truthful to our experience? Because honesty is radical, which gets me going. Intimacy makes us vulnerable, which and in there's kind of like, we have these symbols of the Vajra and the lotus, that honesty is radical and intimacy is vulnerable. We need both of those. We need that Manjushri sword, and we need Amitabha's softness and compassion, and to hold those together. And I know I certainly come down on one side far more than the other. And I know I need to kind of practice bringing in a bit more lotus. Because I think this practicing honesty can help us create a real awareness and honesty of our experience, and to be able to communicate from this place also helps create clearer boundaries and more clarity in the world. It might even mean we can disagree better, because we seek ways to understand different perspectives and different people's experiences rather than wanting to win. Or a clarity and understanding becomes the goal. And practicing real honest communication can bring about real honest connections, real understanding between people, real awareness of each other, and real spiritual friendships. And this for me is where truth has beauty. And that sense of a beautiful mind that is beyond one person's mind. It can be that sense of a collective practice. Beauty is a transcendent quality. And so there's this sense that beauty is, it's kind of being channeled, that honesty, that truthfulness, that beauty is channeled through us. It's not something that's owned. Perfection isn't owned. It's not something that we can be proud of. It's just something that we can surrender to. Kindness isn't owned. Generosity isn't owned. Empathy is not owned. Wisdom is not owned. It's something that arises within us. And truth can be beautiful, but it can also be devastating. So often, again, we're kind of traversing these kind of different crosswinds and different currents in this sense of, sometimes we are in a space of reassurance versus truth. Sometimes truth isn't always the right answer. We have to navigate that carefully and skillfully. And sometimes there's no way of knowing. Sometimes actually the truth is I don't know. I don't have the answer right now. I'm not able to have that conversation with you right yet. Sometimes that's the truth. But as Buddhist practitioners, I am, hoping and seeking to align ourselves with reality. Thinking that we can arrange reality to align with us is really lacking in wisdom. So we can either align with it or become subject to it. So this kind of sense of seeking truth as a spiritual quest, in a sense, something that we can give ourselves to, something we can play with, something we can hold up as an ideal, something we can just kind of have a relationship with in many different ways. So I'm going to end on another quote, actually. This one's just from a book that we happen to be reading on Tuesday morning. So this is Rodney Smith. He said, "Truth is given a channel to emerge when our practice is aligned within its principles. And freedom can only arise when all our energies are in accordance with that end. These principles are derived from an awakened dimension, and to enter that dimension often means living within its rules prior to awakening to its truths. If freedom of the Buddha is the intention of our spiritual practice, then freedom is dependent upon whether we are in alignment with the truth of our nature, in body, speech and mind, at every step along the way." So I'm at end.
Thank you so much, Priyada. Do you have some questions? We will break into small groups.
I do have some questions.
Thank you.
Okay. So the first question I have is, what would or does inspire you on a spiritual quest for truth? Where does truth become clouded for you? And what might be a personal precept or truth that you might take on for the week? If you get that far, which you might not.